Hey there. Okay, so in this video we're going to talk about file servers and creating shares and permissions for those shares. This is for Windows Server 2016, and what we've done so far is created a domain with two DCs, configure DHCP and DNS roles to make that those roles work, and we have a file server added with a file server role added but not configured yet, and we can use a PC to test those features. What we want to do this time is add a drive to the operating system, create a folder for shares, and learn about breaking inheritance. We'll create user groups. We'll create groups for file shares. We'll create at least one share and then apply permissions for the users and groups to those shares. I'm not too sure what we'll do in the next video. I think I might break this into two videos depending on how much I ramble and how long it goes, just to break it up. We'll see. And again, our overall plan, we'll create a share, we'll create read and write permissions for those shares, and we'll create a share permission that will only allow read permissions. And we will create two user groups with a few users in each and allow them access to those appropriate shares. And as well, we'll go a little bit deeper and create a second subfolder with unique permissions in there. We'll break inheritance on this USA folder, and we'll apply unique permissions to that and show you what it looks like for this end user and how the permissions are applied. So over the years, that's what I found to be best practice and easiest to manage and maintain, as long as you're not lazy with applying permissions and using groups to do stuff. So that's pretty much it. Let me get everything set up and I'll be back. Okay, so I have added a hard drive to the virtual machine, but the operating doesn't see that yet. That's normal. So we have to come into the server and provision it. So if we come under disks, it'll show up here, I believe, as here we go, one online disk, and it has an unknown partition. We haven't formatted it or anything yet, so we have to bring it online. And typically this is much bigger, but this is just for an example. And you do want to always use a separate hard drive, physical hard drive. One is for performance reason. If it grows very big in the terabytes, that I/O, that disk will be will start to get used quite a bit, and if you have a performance hit on that disk where your file shares are, that would affect the operating system and affect other drives and the whole performance of the machine. Another reason is you don't want to create a share on the C drive of your operating system, is because if a user ends up dumping their torrent movie files on there, it will fill up and all of your other shares would stop working and your operating system would break as well. So you do want to separate them. Initialize or new volume will also start that process. And there's a nice little wizard now. There's another way you can do it too. If you go under Tools, Computer Management, and then go into Disk Management. That will be another way. And here, it's automatically noticed that there's a new disk. If it's a very large drive, you'll want to select a GPT. That's the more modern way to do it. MBR shouldn't be used for the most part when for your file shares nowadays. So now the disk has been initialized. We can create a new simple volume. We'll just follow the wizard there. I'm going to use the entire space that's available, and I'm going to assign it the drive letter. I'll assign it whatever you want. The drive letter Z. Oops. Next. And I'll call it user data. And next. And generally the defaults is good for a general purpose file share. So now we have our Z drive, and if we minimize this, this has to be refreshed. Refresh, and that'll come up, but it should also be here. So now we can create a share here, or a folder. It's not a share yet. Shares, and we can create our shares for our different departments in here. So for example, HR, the executives will want one for their stuff. IT might want their own folder, and so on. Okay, so just to review here, I've got everything prepared, and so what I've done is I've created a few OUs and a few users and groups, and I'll just review that right now. So I've put all of my end user accounts in a folder system as shown here. So there's a few users in the HR department and a few users in the executive department. And for security groups, I have created groups for those staff. So all of my HR staff get placed into this group here, and all of my executive users get placed into this group. So for example, we can say the two members, they're in the HR OU. And the two executives, again, they're in the executive OU and they're added to that group. So for file shares, we have two file shares set up, the HR file share and the executive share. I've created two groups for each, and one will give read and write permission to that share, and one will give read permission to that share. And so we want the HR user group to have access to this file share. So what this does is simplify your process when you create a new user, or even if you remove a user. If you remove a user from the HR group, they will lose their access to this HR file share. Or if you add new employees to the group, they automatically get this file share when you add them to this user group. Okay, so I'll show you how that's done here. You open up this group, and under members, you add in the user group that you want to have access to this file share. Okay, so that's how it's done. It's a little bit, if you don't understand it, it'll take a little bit of practice, and setting it up on your own gives you the best training to do that. So, and you can also double click. So if you want to know who's in this, who has access to this, you can double click and go under members. If it shows as a group here, you can double click that, and you can see the description and also the members. Okay, so we haven't actually created the file shares yet. We've created the folders, but we haven't shared them. So if we go under PC, oops, sorry, that's the domain controller. So here we have this PC, the file shares we've created are on this drive, and the shares will be in these folders here. And there's a couple simple documents just to test that feature out. So the first thing here is to create the shares. How should I do it? I'll show you the wrong way to do it first. We'll create the shares. So we'll share this file. There's a few different ways to do it, and I'll do it the old school way first. Click on Sharing, Advanced Share. Share this folder. You can edit the name if you want, but that works fine for me. Permissions, and check everybody is allowed. So this is called the share level permission. Everything in this tab here, well, everything in this permission list, share permissions. Now, when we go under the security tab, this is more restrictive, so that will always apply. The most restrictive rules will apply, take effect over the other permissions. And we want what is this, the executive group. So we want to add the file share permission for the executive group. And we're going to add the read-write. And we can add 2 by putting in a semicolon. I know that's hard to see, but it's a semicolon. And the read permission. If we click on check names, it'll complain about one of them. It won't know. So here it says the object doesn't, or more than one object matches the name of R, because they're 2 similar names, right? So because it's complaining about the R one, I'm going to select that one and click OK, and it underlines both, meaning that they're found in Active Directory. And now what permissions do we want to give? We want to give read permission for the executive, so that's actually what the default is. You can see they don't have modify permission, they don't have permission to write to the folder, which is what we want for that group. Now for the read-write permission, we just want to grant them modify. So we check that box, and actually the one underneath, the write permission, gets checked as well, which is perfect for our scenario. We want them to be able to add and remove and update their files. I never give anybody, end users, full control, because then they can come into this window, change security, they can deny administrator rights, they can deny access to your backup server so they can't back up files, and it just causes more headaches than it's worth. So just don't give end users that option. Don't let them know it's available, and you'll be much happier. I'll do the same thing for the HR folder, just go a bit faster. I won't explain it again. Oops. Add. Okay. And the security tab, we'll add the 2 accounts in here. Add file share HR read write. File share HR read. Click on OK, or click on names. Again, it's going to complain, but that's what we want. We want read permission and modify for the read-write. Click on OK and close. So now to demonstrate, we can use our Windows 7 computer here, and we're signed in as the Superman, who is a part of the HR group, I think. Let me double check. DC. So, oops. Here. HR. So Superman is a part of the HR group. So he should only be able to see the HR share. But we can see that he can see 2 shares. Well, that's normal in our current setup. That is to be expected, but he shouldn't be able to access the executive drive. He can access this folder. He can add and remove documents. So that's good. But, hey, he can access the executive drive. That's not right. And he can add and remove files there. So why is that? That is something called inheritance, and it can be a pain in the butt if you don't set it up right. So there's permissions on this drive that inherit to this folder, that inherit to this folder, and that folder there. So that's the reason why it's happening, is because we don't know what these permissions are, or we haven't looked yet. So if you right click properties, pick security, and now we can start to say, hey, wait a minute, this isn't what we wanted. So click on advanced and we get a bit more detail. So here we can see the everyone group has read and execute permission to this folder only. So because it applies only to this folder, to that drive, that's fine. It's not going to inherit to the folder below. And here we can see users, which is a local group of this file server, can create files, write data for subfolders only. And so here we want to see, well, who is in that group? Who's in the local users group? So to find out, we can go into computer management and we just find the local users section. in the background. Expand local users. This is groups. So there's a group called users. Who's in there? Well, that's everybody in our domain. That isn't what we want. We don't want everybody in the domain if we share a file to be able to read and write files on each share. So we don't want that permission to inherit to all of the subfolders. So what we are going to do is remove. Do we want all the users to be able to create and append files and folders? No, we don't. Do we want all users to be able to read all folders, subfolders, and files? No, we don't. Creator owner. We don't want this either. In short, if you create a folder, you're the owner, and you get full permission over that. So we don't want that because we don't want end users to have full control over the folders they create or files. They can have modify permission, but not full. So I'm going to take that away too. And I'm going to add something in here. I'm going to add domain admins, which is the IT department, or, well, in this area, in this example anyways, we're going to say domain admins. Oops, domains admin. Check name, click OK, and we want full control. Now you might have, if your environment is larger, more than a few IT people, you might have your security segregated so your domain admins can only create a domain. And then you have a you have a different group for your IT staff so they can manage servers and do DHCP and all that stuff. You might have that, which is best practice. This here, not so much. Okay, so now domain admins, which is me, I have full permission over this drive because of that rule there. And read it now. And because of that rule there. I'm not going to replace permissions on subfolders because that would ruin the permissions that I applied to my executive drive and stuff. And we can see that now. So if we just right-click Properties, Security. So now everyone that's fine for this specific folder, domain admins has full permission. The system can do what it needs, and administrators can do what they need. Go to the subfolder, this share here. It's not being shared. Security, again, we have full permissions, and that's going to inherit down to everybody. Go up here, executive group, share. Here we can see they still have their permissions, but domain admins, it's kind of grayed out because it's inheriting from the parent, and so is that. So now this is set up the way we want. This is much, much better and more secure. So here you can see he's currently in the share, but if I refresh, he should be kicked out. Oh, can't access. And yeah, he's kicked out now. So we have that set up. This is still normal and to be expected. You can see the shares. We can fix that later. Let's hope that we fix this one. And yeah, you can still access the stuff that way. So there is a quick and dirty rundown of permissions and inheritance. And actually, one more example. For this HR folder, this user, if you remember right, security, he has read-write permission. So with read-write permission, that allows you to add content, to rename it, but it also gives you permission to delete it. Can I delete it? No, you can't delete it, which is good. Yeah, so that's fine. What else? Let me just pause this and oh yeah, okay, so we'll just add in one more thing here. For our next slide, we're going to create a subfolder. We're going to give them read-write access to this USA folder, but we don't want them to be able to see any files here in the HR root, and we don't want them to be able to delete or open any files. So how do we do that? So let me prep that. First, a new user. Create a new OU. This is more for my memory, so I remember later on in other tutorials. So you'll create a USA HR group, and there'll be one for different regions as well. New user. Okay, so Pac-Man is a member of the USA HR group. So I'm going to create a new group. User GRP HR USA. And we are going to put Pac-Man in that group. P-Man. And we'll just members of the Did we do that yet? Okay, so we have a description and that. And then we are going to create I'll just do that now before I create the group. So in the HR folder, we're going to create a USA folder, and they're going to make documents, and store them in there. Oops, cancel. I copied the wrong one. Copy. Paste. Okay. So now we want the USA user to be able to go into this folder, but we don't want them to be able to see or open or delete those files, or delete this one. So we need to create a group for that share. File, domain controller. And so a new, hey, that's not what I wanted. New group. Call it, and we'll use that same naming convention. So the HR share and the USA folder, and we're going to say they have read-write permissions. Read-write access to the share file 1 can HR USA. And so we're going to put in the members the HR USA staff. So user group HR, and it'll complain USR GRP HR underscore, I think. There, so which HR group? We want the USA one. Click OK. So now we have that, and it's tied to a user eventually when we go through there. So Pac-Man. Good. Okay, so now we can go back to the file share and say the permissions. Now we don't want to create another share because there's already one at the HR folder. You could, but it's not the best way to do it. So we're going to leave it in that the HR members of this path, this group, can still see in, this might be the HR director, the HR manager is in this group. She should be able to see all of the documents within the HR folder, right? So you want that to inherit. And we'll say we want that to inherit too. But we want a new permission to say that the file share group HR USA read-write. Yeah, read-write. We want them to be able to read and write this folder. click OK. But if we test that, which I'll do right now, and again I'll log in as Pacman. Okay, so we can see Pacman's logged in. If we browse to the file share, oops, again, can't access that because he doesn't have permissions. Oh, but he can access the HR folder. Well, that's right. I'm expecting to do that, to see that. And why is it? Well, he has permission to this folder, but he doesn't have permission to the HR folder yet. So let's apply that now. And we can do that easily with a security group. So here we can say the, actually wait, this isn't the right way to do it. What we want to do is click on Advanced. And now we want to click on Add, because we want to give him special permissions, because he's a special kind of guy. So here we want to specify the file share, HR-USA read write. So now what we want to say is the members of this group can only see this root HR folder up there, right? So we want only this folder, and they can see this folder. So you want those ones clicked. Click on OK. And here we can see the USA users have read permission to only the folders, not the files within that folder. Click on OK. Now let's see what happens. I'll refresh, double click. Aha! So we can see the items again, because if we go back, but we won't be able to open them or delete them. So double click, access denied. Denied, right? And delete, that doesn't work either. And can we access this folder? Aha, we can. And we can delete items, we can create items, rename them. So our permissions are working pretty good. There's a feature called access-based enumeration that would actually hide these files. Yeah, so let me just check one other setting here to see. Read, oh, advanced, edit. There, okay, so let's try this. We'll say this folder only can only read that folder. We'll see what happens with that. Click OK. And we'll go back to the root, refresh, double click, same thing. So again, you can't do anything, but you can do stuff here. You can edit files, save them, delete them. So yeah, that one feature, access-based enumeration, is what you would need to be able to hide these names. So for example, if HR saved files with your social insurance name as the name, well, then they can get a list of names of social, or a list of social insurance numbers, just by being able to see that list. So again, they probably wouldn't do that, but it's an example. I've seen like credit card numbers as their file name, which is ridiculous too. But anyways, that concludes this little tutorial about file shares. It is a bit more than basic, gets into more of the advanced stuff, but in the next videos we'll talk about more of the fun features of file servers, such as quotas, DFS, that kind of thing. Anyways, thanks guys.